Marcus Rivera stood at exactly 5 feet 6 inches and weighed barely 130 pounds, soaking wet. At 17 years old, with his thick-rimmed glasses, oversized hoodies, and perpetually downcast eyes, he looked like every bully's dream target. His olive skin and slight accent from his family's recent move from El Paso made him stand out even more at Westfield High School, where most students had known each other since kindergarten. Nobody at his new school knew that Marcus had spent the last 3 years training in underground fighting circuits across Texas and New Mexico. Nobody knew that his unassuming frame concealed lightning-fast reflexes and devastating precision. Nobody knew that his quiet demeanor came from a discipline learned in smoky basements where one mistake could mean waking up in a hospital. Most importantly, nobody knew that his family had relocated specifically because Marcus had hospitalized 3 gang members who had threatened his younger sister. Keep your head down, finish senior year, start fresh in college. These were the words his father had repeated during their late-night drive to Oregon. No more fighting, no more trouble, Marcus had promised. But Blake Morrison was making that promise harder to keep every single day. Blake Morrison was everything Marcus wasn't. 6 feet 2 inches of pure athletic arrogance with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confident smirk that came from never experiencing real consequences. As Westfield's star quarterback and son of the town's wealthiest family, Blake ruled the school with an iron fist wrapped in a Letterman jacket. His crew consisted of Tyler Jenkins, a stocky wrestler with dead eyes and knuckles that bore permanent scars, and Cody Walsh, whose family owned the local auto shop and whose vocabulary seemed limited to cruel laughter and creative profanity. The first incident happened on Marcus's 3rd day at Westfield. He had been sitting alone in the cafeteria, mechanically eating his lunch while reviewing chemistry notes, when Blake's shadow fell across his table. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Blake's voice carried that particular mixture of amusement and contempt that marked natural predators. "New meat, boys." Tyler and Cody flanked their leader like well-trained attack dogs, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. The cafeteria fell silent. 200 students suddenly finding their food fascinating while stealing glances at the unfolding drama. Mrs. Patterson, the lunch monitor, conveniently discovered urgent paperwork that required her immediate attention at the far end of the room. "I'm talking to you, Jose," Blake continued, deliberately mispronouncing what he assumed was Marcus's name. "You deaf or just stupid?" Marcus looked up slowly, taking in the 3 faces staring down at him. In another life, in another place, Blake Morrison would have been unconscious before he finished his 2nd sentence, but Marcus had made a promise. "My name is Marcus, and I'm just trying to eat lunch." "Marcus," Blake repeated mockingly. "Well, Marcus, here's the thing. See, you're sitting at our table." Marcus glanced around. There were no reserved signs, no indication that this particular table belonged to anyone. Just another petty power play. "I didn't know. I can move." "Damn right you can move." Blake reached out and casually swept Marcus's tray off the table. Mashed potatoes, green beans, and chocolate milk exploded across the floor in a mess of food and plastic. "But first, clean up your mess." The silence in the cafeteria was deafening. Marcus stared at the destroyed meal, his hands clenching and unclenching beneath the table. "Keep your head down. Finish senior year." His father's voice echoed in his mind as he slowly stood and began collecting the scattered debris. Every eye in the room watched as he knelt on the floor, picking up food while Blake and his crew laughed above him. "That's a good little janitor," Tyler sneered. "Maybe we should get you a uniform." Marcus said nothing. He cleaned up every last bit of food, disposed of the tray, and walked out of the cafeteria without looking back. But Blake Morrison had tasted blood, and predators never forget the scent. The harassment escalated systematically over the following weeks. Blake had turned tormenting Marcus into a daily ritual, a performance designed to reinforce his dominance while providing entertainment for his followers. In the hallways between classes, Blake would shoulder-check Marcus into lockers hard enough to leave bruises. During PE class, Tyler would accidentally spike volleyballs directly at Marcus's head. Cody took particular pleasure in parking his truck to block Marcus's beat-up Honda in the school parking lot, forcing him to wait until the end of football practice to leave. The worst part wasn't the physical intimidation, it was the psychological warfare. Blake had discovered that Marcus received free lunch and made sure to announce it loudly whenever they crossed paths. He spread rumors about Marcus's family being illegal immigrants, despite the fact that the Riveras had been American citizens for 3 generations. He convinced other students to avoid Marcus by claiming he smelled like taco grease and failure. Marcus endured it all with the same stoic silence that had served him well in the underground circuits. He attended classes, completed assignments, and counted down the days until graduation. But every night he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his muscles twitching with the memory of combat, his mind replaying scenarios where Blake Morrison learned what happened when you pushed the wrong person too far. "Don't give them a reason to look deeper into our background," his father had warned. "Don't give them a reason to ask questions about El Paso." So Marcus stayed quiet. Even when Blake cornered him in the bathroom and shoved his head toward the toilet bowl. Even when Tyler spread rumors that Marcus was gay because he didn't fight back. Even when Cody keyed wetback into the paint of his car. He stayed quiet and told himself it was temporary. 3 more months until graduation. He could handle 3 more months. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in March. Marcus had been having a particularly difficult day, struggling with a migraine that made the fluorescent lights feel like ice picks in his brain. He had skipped lunch to rest in the library, hoping the quiet darkness might provide some relief. When the final bell rang, he gathered his books slowly, waiting for the initial rush of students to clear the hallways. He should have known better. Blake Morrison was waiting by his locker, arms crossed, surrounded by his usual entourage, plus a few new faces who had come to watch the show. Word had spread that Blake was planning something special, and the hallway was packed with spectators pretending to organize their lockers while actually positioning themselves for the best view. "There he is," Blake announced as Marcus approached. "The Invisible Man himself." Marcus tried to step around them, but Tyler moved to block his path. "Where you going, hero?" "Blake's talking to you." "I just want to get my stuff and go home," Marcus said quietly. His migraine was getting worse, and the crowd of onlookers was making his skin crawl. Too many people, too many eyes, too much attention. Everything his father had warned him to avoid. "Oh, poor little Marcus wants to go home to Mama," Blake cooed in mock sympathy. "But see, we've got a problem. Tyler here says you were staring at him in the showers after PE. Now, I told him that couldn't be right, because that would make you some kind of pervert. So I figured I'd ask you directly." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He could see the calculation behind Blake's eyes, the way he was setting up the narrative. Either Marcus was gay, which would make him a target for different reasons, or he was a pervert, which would make him a pariah. There was no right answer, no way to win. That was the beauty of Blake's psychological torture. He always made sure his victims had no escape route. "I wasn't staring at anyone," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just want to go home." "He wants to go home," Blake announced to his audience, who responded with cruel laughter. "But here's the thing, Maria. I don't believe you. I think you were looking. I think you liked what you saw. And I think you need to be taught a lesson about boundaries." The crowd pressed closer, sensing blood in the water. Marcus could see some of them recording with their phones, eager to capture whatever humiliation Blake had planned. Mrs. Henderson, the only teacher in the hallway, had retreated to her classroom and shut the door. The message was clear. The adults would not intervene. Marcus was on his own. Blake reached into his backpack and pulled out a bottle of chocolate milk. See, Tyler feels violated. He feels like his privacy was invaded. And when Tyler feels violated, that makes me angry. And when I'm angry, well... Blake unscrewed the cap and held the bottle over Marcus's head. I think you need to cool off and consider your actions. The chocolate milk poured over Marcus's head in a thick, cold stream. It soaked through his hair, ran down his face, and stained his favorite hoodie brown. The crowd erupted in laughter and cheers, phones capturing every second of his humiliation. Marcus stood perfectly still, letting the milk drip onto the floor, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles went white. This is it, he thought, this is where it ends, but Blake wasn't finished. While Marcus stood there dripping and shaking with rage, Blake pulled out a marker and began writing on the lockers around them. Pervert in big black letters, creep on another, gay Mexican on a third. Each word was a deliberation choice, designed to ensure that Marcus's humiliation would follow him for months. There, Blake said, stepping back to admire his work. Now everyone will know what you really are. The hallway erupted in fresh laughter and applause. Students were taking pictures of the graffiti, already composing social media posts that would spread Marcus's shame throughout the entire school district. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was character assassination. This was the systematic destruction of everything Marcus had built in his new life. Marcus wiped chocolate milk from his eyes and looked around at the faces surrounding him. He saw excitement, amusement, and cruel satisfaction. He saw people who had watched him suffer for months without saying a word. He saw a community that had decided he was acceptable collateral damage in Blake Morrison's ego games. And in that moment, his father's warning seemed less important than his own self-respect. Blake, Marcus said quietly. His voice was different now. Lower, more controlled. The change was subtle, but several students in the crowd stopped laughing and looked at him more carefully. Blake turned around with a grin. What's that, wetback? You got something to say? Marcus pulled his chocolate milk-soaked hoodie over his head and dropped it on the floor. Underneath, his plain white t-shirt revealed arms that were lean but defined, shoulders that were broader than they had appeared under loose clothing. He took off his glasses and slipped them into his pocket. Without them, his dark eyes were sharp and focused in a way that made Tyler take an unconscious step backward. I said, Marcus repeated, his voice carrying clearly through the hallway. You made a mistake. Blake laughed, but the sound was forced now. Something in Marcus's posture had changed. The way he stood, the way he held his hands, the way his weight was distributed on the balls of his feet. Students who knew nothing about fighting still recognized the transformation instinctively. This was not the same person who had been cleaning up food in the cafeteria 6 weeks ago. Oh, we got ourselves a tough guy now, Blake announced to the crowd. But his voice lacked its usual confidence. What are you gonna do, Maria? Cry to your mama in Spanish. Marcus took a step forward, then another. The crowd began to part unconsciously, creating space around the two boys. Blake's friends moved to flank their leader, but they looked uncertain now, like dogs who had cornered something that might not be prey after all. You want to know what I'm going to do, Blake? Marcus asked conversationally. I'm going to give you exactly what you've been asking for. Blake Morrison had spent his entire life being bigger, stronger, and more popular than everyone around him. He had never encountered real resistance, never faced genuine consequences. So when Marcus Rivera launched himself forward with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to fight in places where second chances didn't exist, Blake was completely unprepared. Marcus's first punch caught Blake in the solar plexus with surgical precision, Blake doubled over, gasping for air, and Marcus grabbed him by the shoulders and drove his knee upward. Blake's head snapped back, blood streaming from his nose, and he staggered into the lockers with a metallic crash. The hallway erupted in screams and shouts, but Marcus heard none of it. He was in the zone now, the place where time slowed down and every movement had purpose. Tyler charged from his left, meaty fists swinging wildly. Marcus ducked under the punch, hooked Tyler's ankle with his foot, and sent the larger boy crashing into a water fountain. Tyler's head hit the metal with a sound like a gong, and he slumped to the floor, dazed. Cody was smarter. He tried to circle behind Marcus, probably planning to grab him in a bear hug. But Marcus had been fighting multiple opponents since he was 14. He pivoted on his heel, caught Cody's wrist as he reached forward, and twisted it in a direction wrists weren't meant to go. Cody screamed and dropped to his knees, his arm bent at an impossible angle. Blake had recovered enough to charge again, roaring with rage and embarrassment. But rage made him sloppy, and Marcus had learned long ago that angry opponents were easy to defeat. He sidestepped Blake's wild swing, grabbed the back of his head, and slammed his face into the lockers once, twice, 3 times. Each impact rang through the hallway like a gunshot. When Marcus released him, Blake slid down the lockers, leaving a streak of blood on the metal. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. 3 boys who had spent months terrorizing Marcus now lay groaning on the floor, broken and bleeding. The crowd stood in stunned silence, phones still recording, but their owners too shocked to speak. Marcus straightened his shirt and put his glasses back on. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, but it carried clearly through the silent hallway. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. For 6 weeks, you people stood around and watched while these 3 losers tried to destroy me. You recorded it. You laughed. You shared it on social media. You made me into your entertainment. He looked around the circle of faces, making eye contact with students who had never bothered to learn his name. You want to know why I never fought back before? It wasn't because I couldn't. It was because I was trying to be better than this. I was trying to be civilized. I was trying to give you the benefit of the doubt. Blake groaned and tried to sit up, blood still streaming from his nose. Marcus glanced down at him with something approaching pity. But you know what I realized today? Civilized doesn't work with animals. Some people only understand one language, and Blake Morrison just got his first lesson. Tyler was struggling to his feet, his face pale and confused. Marcus turned to face him directly. Tyler, if you ever so much as look at me wrong again, I'll put you in the hospital, not the nurse's office, the hospital, with tubes and machines and very concerned doctors. Tyler nodded frantically, still not entirely sure what had just happened. Marcus looked at Cody, who was cradling his twisted wrist and whimpering. Cody, I know where you live. I know where you work. I know where your girlfriend goes to school. If you ever damage my property again, if you ever spread rumors about me again, if you ever so much as mention my name, I will make you disappear. Are we clear? Cody's eyes were wide with terror. He nodded so vigorously that his teeth chattered. Finally, Marcus turned his attention back to Blake, who was trying to use the lockers to pull himself upright. Blood covered the front of his Letterman jacket, and his left eye was already swelling shut. And Blake, Marcus said conversationally, you magnificent idiot. You beautiful, arrogant fool. You have no idea how lucky you are that this happened in a school hallway instead of somewhere private. Because if we had been alone, if there hadn't been witnesses, if I hadn't been worried about my permanent record, you would be in an ambulance right now, not walking to the nurse's office. In an ambulance, with sirens. Blake mumbled something through his split lip, but Marcus held up a hand for silence. I'm not finished. See, you made a fundamental error in judgment. You assumed that because I didn't fight back, I couldn't fight back. You assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. You assumed that because I was new, I was defenseless. But you know what happens when you make assumptions, Blake? You end up looking like you do right now, broken and bloody and wondering where it all went wrong. Marcus picked up his hoodie and walked to his locker, stepping over Tyler's legs without acknowledging his presence. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, students pressing themselves against the walls to give him space. He gathered his books methodically, taking his time, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Oh, and one more thing," he said without turning around. "Tomorrow, Blake is going to apologize to me, publicly, in front of the same people who watched him humiliate me, and he's going to clean that graffiti off the lockers, with his own hands, because if he doesn't, well..." Marcus turned and smiled pleasantly. "I'll be happy to continue his education in consequences." Blake tried to stand up straighter, to summon some of his old arrogance. You can't make me..." Marcus took 3 steps toward him, and Blake immediately cowered against the lockers. The change in body language was so dramatic that several students gasped audibly. "Blake," Marcus said gently, "do you remember what happened to you 30 seconds ago? Because it felt like you were unconscious for part of it. Let me refresh your memory. I destroyed you. I destroyed your friends. I did it quickly, efficiently, and without breaking a sweat. And the beautiful part, everyone saw it, everyone recorded it. By tomorrow morning, every student in this school will know that Blake Morrison, the big, tough quarterback, got beaten up by the quiet kid from El Paso." Blake's face went even paler as the implications sank in. "So when I tell you that you're going to apologize, you're going to apologize. When I tell you to clean those lockers, you're going to clean them. Because the alternative is that I keep teaching you lessons until you learn to be respectful. And trust me, Blake, you don't want to see what my advanced curriculum looks like." The bell rang, signaling the start of the next class period, but nobody moved. Marcus slung his backpack over his shoulder and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. Just before he reached the doors, he turned back to address the crowd one final time. "For those of you recording this, make sure you get Blake's apology tomorrow. I want it documented. I want everyone to see what happens when bullies finally meet someone who doesn't put up with their garbage. Share it with your friends. Post it online. Make it go viral. Let it serve as a reminder that quiet doesn't mean weak and patient doesn't mean powerless." He pushed through the doors and disappeared into the parking lot, leaving behind a hallway full of stunned students and 3 boys who were slowly learning the difference between being feared and being respected. The next morning, Blake Morrison stood in the main hallway with a can of paint remover and a scrub brush. His face was a rainbow of bruises, his lip was stitched, and his left eye was swollen shut. A crowd had gathered to watch, phones recording as he methodically cleaned each piece of graffiti he had written the day before. "I want to apologize," Blake said loudly, his words slightly slurred from his injuries. "Yesterday I behaved badly toward Marcus Rivera. I wrote things that were untrue and hurtful. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, watching impassively. When Blake finished cleaning and looked up for approval, Marcus simply nodded once and walked away. The message was clear. This was not forgiveness. This was justice. In the weeks that followed, the social dynamics at Westfield High School underwent a complete transformation. Blake Morrison's reign of terror was over. Without the fear he had cultivated so carefully, his followers abandoned him. Tyler Jenkins switched to different classes to avoid running into Marcus in the hallways. Cody Walsh requested a transfer to another school entirely, claiming he needed a fresh start. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself in the strange position of being simultaneously respected and feared. Students who had ignored him for months now greeted him in the hallways. Teachers who had turned blind eyes to his harassment now made sure he felt welcome in their classrooms. The football team, deprived of their leader's toxic influence, began treating younger students with something approaching human decency. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The shy, withdrawn boy who had started the school year hoping to remain invisible had discovered that sometimes visibility was necessary. Sometimes standing up for yourself required taking a stand. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully was to show them that their victim could become their worst nightmare. 3 months later, at graduation, Marcus Rivera walked across the stage to receive his diploma with quiet pride. In the audience, his father watched with a mixture of concern and admiration. They would need to have a long conversation about what had happened at Westfield High School, but that was for later. For now, Marcus Rivera had learned the most important lesson of all. Respect isn't given freely. Sometimes it has to be earned, and sometimes when you're dealing with people who only understand violence, the most peaceful thing you can do is give them exactly what they're asking for. Blake Morrison graduated with him, but barely. His grades had suffered along with his reputation, and the college scholarship he had been counting on had mysteriously evaporated. He avoided eye contact during the ceremony and left immediately after receiving his diploma. Some lessons, Marcus reflected, were more expensive than others. As Marcus walked out of Westfield High School for the final time, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He had kept his promise to his father, technically. He had finished senior year. He hadn't started any trouble. He had simply finished what someone else began. And sometimes that made all the difference in the world.